Pekin Community High School District 303 Board of Education regular meeting is now in session. Would everyone please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item, roll call. Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Allison Greeny.
Here.
Vera.
Here.
Hill.
Here.
Boheimer.
Here.
Huey.
Here.
Wrigley.
Here.
Howard.
Here. Having a full board tonight, we have the necessary quorum. I'd like to take just a second to say welcome back to our faculty, staff, and students. We have all the components in place to have another great and successful school year. Next item on the agenda would be the approval of minutes. Those minutes being the Operation and Maintenance Committee meeting of July 27th, the regular board meeting of July 27th, and the closed session board meeting of July 27th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And second by Mrs. Hoheimer. Motion by Mr. Hill and second by Mrs. Hoheimer to approve the minutes as presented. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Hill.
Aye.
Boheimer.
Aye.
Allison Greeny.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Wrigley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Minutes approved as presented. Next item, communications, public comments, and participation. And as is our tradition, we'll begin with board applause. Tonight, if I may, I'll start with Mr. Allison Greeny.
Once again, thank you to our buildings and grounds staff for working with it.
Yeah, I wondered if you were
I forgot.
in alphabetical order.
Apologize. No, but I had, in my mind, I had you all the way to the end.
That's all right. I was caught off guard, but that's all right.
Well, Mr. Barry, you'll go next with my apologies, okay?
But thanks to our building and grounds staff for getting the building up and running, and everything looks great. Buildings, we did a tour of the facility tonight, so thank you to all those gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Allison Greeny. It's always been amazing to me how they get things done in the summer, because things slow down in summer, but they don't dead stop. There's always something going on around here. Right, Dr. Owens?
And that's no doubt about it.
So it's, in my mind, it's a challenge. Okay, Mr. Bear, with my kindest apologies.
Not a problem. I was going to say the same thing, so I will just second what
See,
Mr.
now,
Allison agrees.
if I had done it right, he could have said ditto to you. Forgive me. Mrs. O'Hara.
I'd like to tell the administration that I'm really glad that I know they've been really busy this summer trying to get these jobs filled, and you've gone above and beyond. Even when things were tough, you kept on going and you got the job. We're fully staffed. Looks good. That makes me happy.
Good point. Mr. Hill.
No board applause this month.
Understandable. Mr. Wrigley.
I'd like to extend good luck to the certified staff. Not that the non-certified staff doesn't deserve good luck as well, but particularly to the certified staff, it can be difficult to get back into the swing of things and start up the school year. So appreciate their efforts and wish them good luck in a new year.
Thank you, Mr. Wrigley. How about Mr. Huey?
Well, I'd like to thank the staff and the administration that was responsible for this great flurry of opening school activities. A parents' night, a movie, a football game. It really shows the community and lets the students feel that school is indeed in session and we're off and running.
Thank you, Mr. Huey. I'd like to direct my board applause to the board-sponsored luncheon last week, at which we recognized service awards. We gave out the Outstanding Contributor Award. We had a fine meal, and then we transitioned into Peterson Theater, and I just got a real kick out of the introductions. I thought Dr. Owens did a great job, and there was a lot of laughing and smiling, and it was very interactive, and we we enjoyed that, or at least I got the impression people were, and I thought Mrs. Sandberg had the greatest comeback when you made your comment. But it was a nice event, and I was pleased to be a part of it. Next item on the agenda will be our own Sarah McKenzie. The microphone is yours.
Good evening. This month during student council we've been pretty busy. We started off with our freshman ice cream social at Double D's, and we had about 20 new freshmen, so that was exciting to get to know them and meet them the first time. One fun thing we did was make new teacher baskets. We made about 25 this year, myself and another student, and so we got them like dry erase boards and pens, sticky notes, candy, stuff like that. And then we also had the teacher luncheon, which we had Jimmy John's cater for us and set that up and wrote nice things to the teachers so they could have a nice first week back. We also did the St. Jude Telethon, which was very fun. It was my first time going. And I'm not sure how much like our school specifically raised, but we did pretty well. We also had the all-council pool party at the country club, and so we had good attendance at that as well. And then our last thing is Blackout coming up pretty soon on September 18th. We have all of our sponsors, and right now we're at $3,445, and that's $300 up from last year at this time. So we're excited and we keep going with that. So hopefully you can come to that or support that in any way you can.
Very good, Sarah. Thank you for your report. I was relieved to hear that you had a bunch of new freshmen, didn't have any old freshmen.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Stop me. At this point in the agenda, this is where the public has an opportunity for input. And seeing the sparse public, I doubt that there's anything going to be said, right? The opportunity's there if you'd like to. Okay. That said, we'll move on to approval of claims.
Mr. President, I move for the payment of monthly warrants in the amount of $2,040,504.52 per summary information found on page 24 and detailed information on pages 29, 53, and 71 in the supporting material.
Thank you, Mr. Alsamini. You do that very well. You make it almost sound like a musical or something. Do we have a second, Mrs. Hoheimer? Motion by Mr. Alessandrini, second by Mrs. Hoheimer, to approve the monthly warrants for payment as presented. Are there questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none. Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Boheimer.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Ridley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Monthly warrants will be paid. In addition, you'll find the bank balances on page 26, the district investments on page 27, and the medical care report on page 28 for those who are so inclined. Next item on the agenda, we have a request for closed session regarding the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Also, the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, including meetings held for the purpose of discussing whether a particular parcel should be acquired. Also, the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the public body. Also, litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular public body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be recorded and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting. Do we have such a motion? Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wrigley. Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Boheimer.
Aye.
Ridley.
Aye.
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Following the closed session, the board will reconvene and continue with the board business. Let the record indicate the board is back in open session at 7:18 p.m. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Before I call for a vote on that consent agenda, is there a particular item that a board member would like to hold out for a separate vote? If so, speak up now. Hearing none, I'll be seeking a motion to recommend board approval of the consent agenda, item 5.1.1, as presented, including the personnel report and pending background checks as necessary. Do we have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Huey. Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Motion by Mr. Huey, second by Mrs. Hoheimer, to approve the consent agenda as presented. Before I call for a vote, are there questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Huey.
Aye.
Boheimer.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Wrigley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Consent agenda approved as presented. Next item on the agenda would be policies for a second reading. Mr. Wrigley.
Yeah, the policy committee is presenting 8 policies and 1 exhibit for a second reading. Those policies are 2250, 340, 350, 360, 445, 5120, the exhibit to 5120, and 5270, finally 615. The policy committee's recommendation is the adoption of the policies and the 1 exhibit as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Wrigley. I just need to point out that coming from committee, a second is not required. So then I would ask, are there questions, comments, or concerns regarding any of these policies before we vote? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Wrigley.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Boheimer.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Policies approved as presented. Next item, we have a 2016 close-up trip. Dr. Owens.
As is routine this time of year and as our board policy requires, board approval for any trip over 500 miles. The Social Studies Department, on behalf of Megan Ramlow, is again asking for your permission to take a group of young people to our close-up trip this year. As seen on page 122, the trip will be from April 17th to the 23rd, open to juniors and seniors, and a week long at the nation's capital. So we are recommending board approval of the close-up trip to Washington, D.C. for that week as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. I'd be looking for a motion to that effect. Thank
Second.
you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Motion by Mrs. Hoheimer, second by Mr. Barrett, for board approval of the close-up trip to Washington, D.C. for the week of 17th through 23rd of April 2016 as presented. Questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Boheimer.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Wrigley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Close-up trip approved as presented. Next item, there always seems to be one or two through the cracks, additions to the roster of the 2015 PCHS graduates. Dr. Owens again.
Certainly never our intention, but every once in a while we do tend to make mistakes, and so we did miss 2 students, Joseph Patrick Hyatt and Noel Hope Perkins, off of the list that you approved last month as Pekin High graduates. They also took part of our credit recovery sessions this summer and their names got missed, so we apologize for that, but we wanted to make sure that they are a matter of record.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. I'd be looking for a motion to make these 2 names a matter of record.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Allison Green. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hill. Thank you. Motion by Mr. Alessandrini, second by Mr. Hill, to make these names a matter of record. Questions or concerns? Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Allison Green.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Rivera.
Aye.
Oppenheimer.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Ridley.
Aye.
Hubbard.
Aye. Motion carries. These names are now official. Next item, we have potential 2015-2016 chaperones and volunteers for the PCHS choral program. Dr. Owens again.
As you know, typically, and we did last month, approve chaperones and volunteers for the band program. Lee Wiedemann, who is our new choral director, obviously needed some time to get that list together. So what you have in front of you on page 123 is the list of chaperones and volunteers that she is asking for permission for the 15-16 school year. In your support materials, as a matter of record, background checks are required for chaperones who must be at least 21 years of age and for volunteers who supervise students without Pekin High staff present. So it is our recommendation for board approval of these potential chaperones and volunteers for this school year.
Motion for approval. Second.
Is that Mr. Wrigley?
It was.
And Mr. Hill. Motion by Mr. Wrigley, second by Mr. Hill, to approve the 2015-16 chaperones for the PCHS choral program as presented. Questions or comments? Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Ridley.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Rivera.
Aye.
Oppenheimer.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Choral chaperones approved as presented. Next item, additional 2015-2016 chaperones and volunteers for the band program. Dr. Owens.
You will see on page 124, it isn't just a few names. There's quite a few more names that Carly McCann, our director of the high school band, is requesting to add to the list of potential chaperones and volunteers that we originally approved at last month's board meeting. I think that is a good sign. She has lots of parent support for her program. So that list on 124 is what we are recommending for approval for chaperones and volunteers for this school year as presented.
Do we have a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Motion by Mrs. Hoheimer, second by Mr. Barrett, to approve the 2015-2016 chaperones and volunteers for the band program as presented. Again, any questions or concerns here? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Oppenheimer.
Aye.
Rivera.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Ridley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Chaperones and volunteers for the band program approved as presented. Next item would be renewal of contract with Humana for a Humana Medicare employer plan. Mrs. Schaefer, you're up.
It's that time of year where we have to approve our Humana plan for our over 65 retirees. This is the supplemental program for Medicare that's fully insured now. We started this program, I believe, in 2013. And so on page 125 of your materials, you will find a renewal. It did go up slightly. Last year, I believe it was at $274.41, and the increase this year is $279.68. The district does pick up a portion of that premium, and then the retiree pays a portion of the premium as well. So I would recommend board approval to renew the district's contract with Humana for a Medicare Advantage product for retirees 65 or over for a plan year running January 1st through December 31st, 2016 at a fixed rate of $279.68 per member per month as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Schaefer. Do we have a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Thank you, Mr. Alessandrini. Motion by Mrs. Hoheimer, second by Mr. Alessandrini, to approve the Humana Medicare employer plan as presented. Questions or concerns? Hearing none, Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Oppenheimer.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Rivera.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Huey.
Present.
Ridley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Humana Medicare Employer Plan approved as presented. Next item would be the presentation of the tentative, and I underlined the word tentative, 2015-2016 budget. Again, Mrs. Schaefer.
You should have the presentation either in front of you with hard copy or it's part of board book. I'll also obviously have it up here. Deb, can you see that okay, or do you want a copy? You okay? All right. We'll go ahead and just get started. Obviously, if there's any questions as I go throughout, just interrupt me or ask. For the veteran board members, this is the same format of a presentation as I've given for several years, but certainly if you have any questions, let me know. I always like to start off with what our 2014-15 results were. These are unaudited numbers. Our auditors are scheduled to come the week of September 14th, and they'll be here for 2 weeks, and at that time then they'll go through these figures, but typically there's very little change in material, usually at best. So our operating funds are the education fund, the operations and maintenance fund, transportation, and working cash. So those are all listed there that show you what our excess of revenue over expenditures were for 14-15. In the ed fund, we did have an excess of $373,000. This was a little bit better than expected. We had budgeted a deficit of $246,000. Part of that was because total expenditures were about $630,000 less than projected, and revenue was about $10,000 less than anticipated. On the expenditure side, the majority of that difference is from insurance claims. We are self-insured, and so that's fairly fluid. Our numbers are based on actuarial data, and so until the claims come in, we don't know where we will land. So for insurance, we were up over last year, about $400,000, but total budget-wise, we came in at about $346,000 less than we anticipated. And salaries were also around $100,000 less than budgeted. In the O&M fund, we had ended with a deficit of about $355,000, and we anticipated about $561,000. A lot of that is due to timing. We had a couple projects that were completely finished and paid out by 6/30 as we had anticipated. Notably the softball field, so we have about $42,000 left on that project to pay out of this year's budget. And we had about $28,000 left on the waterproofing project. Health insurance also affects that fund, or the staff that's paid out of that fund, which would be our custodial maintenance staff. So that was about $50,000 less than budgeted, and salaries were about $40,000 less than budgeted due to one less maintenance person during that fiscal year. Transportation ended with a deficit of $47,000, and that was about $80,000 better than what we had budgeted for. And then working cash ended within about $1,000 of what was anticipated. Our non-operating funds make up our debt services fund, the IMRF fund, TOR, capital projects, and health life safety. So debt services is where we pay our bond payments. So typically that fund comes in very close to what's anticipated. We just had a slight surplus of $2,700 in there. IMRF is where we pay FICA, Medicare, and IMRF retirement benefits for our non-certified staff. We had a deficit there of about $68,000. TOR, we were at a deficit of about $176,000. Capital projects, the only activity that was in there was revenue from interest, and with the fund balance that's left in that fund. And then health life safety is where the majority of the activity was for these funds, and that was due to the $10 million bond issuance in February. So that's why you see that large revenue figure. And you'll see as we go forward in 15, 16, and years to come, that's going to flip-flop. The expenditures are going to start to spend that down. So. Take what I typically do is kind of divide this presentation up into our largest sources of revenue, and then I'll hit on our expenditures. So I'll start with the revenue. Our three largest sources of revenue are still real estate taxes. general, state aid, and corporate personal property tax. They make up 85% of our total budget. Real estate taxes at 59%, state aid at 10%, and corporate personal property taxes at 16%. I did go back, just out of curiosity, to look the first year I did this presentation in 2007. Our real estate taxes were 44% and state aid was 22%. So just thought that was interesting. So it's changed quite a bit over the years. The other revenue piece of the pie makes up 15%, and that includes our federal revenue, which would be title dollars and federal reimbursement for the National School Lunch Program. Other state resources and interest income are in that category as well. The next couple of slides have to do with real estate taxes, so just a couple bullet points there. Our 2014 levy actually affects our FY16 budget. We did collect our first disbursement July 1st, and it was about $6.3 million, or 47% of our total extension. Typically, we receive the second disbursement in October, and then the third disbursement comes at the end of November. The 2014 levy was limited by a CPI of 1.5%. We do know the 2015 levy, which typically present in November and you approve in December, that will be limited by a CPI of 0.8%, and that will then affect our 16-17 budget. This is just a graph that kind of shows you what property taxes have looked like over the last several years. It's fairly consistent. We do know this year that we anticipate about $286,000 more in real estate taxes for this budget year. $174,000 of that was generated from existing property, and $112,000 was from new property. Did add a new slide this year. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Senate Bill 316 that's out there. The Senate Bill 316 was introduced to extend tax caps to all governmental units. We are already tax capped, so what that means for us is that if this were to pass, the freeze would go into effect for levy years 2016 and 2017. So the 2016 levy would affect our 17-18 budget, and the 2017 levy would affect our 18-19 budget. So if you see down below that last bullet point, I just kind of did simple math. There's a lot of factors that go into the property tax extension, but doing this simply and assuming this 0.8 CPI applied to our 15 levy, our extension would be $11,953,000. So basically what this Senate bill is suggesting is that you get, they will freeze your taxes for those 2 years, so you get no CPI adjustment. So with that, if that were to happen, and we assumed a 1.5% CPI for 16 and 17, we could see approximately a loss of approximately $360,000. Now, obviously doesn't include then the compounding effect going forward for the lack of an increase on your extension for those 2 years. So, so just quick math, if this were to happen, we could see that would be an estimate of what we would lose for those 2 years. The other large source of revenue that we see is from corporate personal property replacement tax. This is just a bullet point to remind you of where these taxes came from. It was a result of a constitutional change that abolished business personal property taxes and replaced the revenue lost by local governments and school districts. So this was enacted in 1979, and so since that time we've seen dollars come from corporate personal replacement tax. I've given just a history on this slide of what we've seen for the last 5-6 years. Kind of have left some history on there just as a point of reference. In 10-11, we saw a fairly good spike in our replacement tax due to a tax amnesty program where people were allowed to pay taxes late without penalty. So we saw, so the state of Illinois saw a surge of income taxes paid that year, so that obviously filtered down into the school districts. And then really from 11-12 through what we've anticipated for 15-16, we've seen a fairly steady increase. Obviously in 11-12 we saw the drop, but then since that time it's slowly increased again. What we've budgeted for this year is approximately a 3.25% increase, so it would be about $113,000 more than the prior year. Typically, the Department of Revenue will put an estimate out on their site, and it's usually pretty accurate. It's not out there yet. So hopefully, before we approve the budget in September, that'll be out there, and we can see adjust it accordingly if we need to. So this is just an estimate at this point. And again, just a graph to kind of show you the history of where this source of revenue has been over the last few years. State aid is our last major source of revenue. There's been a lot of talk about state aid at the state board level and the state level, and about how that formula is really kind of outdated and archaic. It's been this way for quite some time. There's nothing concrete yet, though, in how they're going to redo this formula. It's a fairly complex formula. It doesn't tend to serve the needs anymore of districts. But as of right now, it's still being calculated the same way, so all the assumptions are made that that's how we will receive it this year. We've been prorated the last few years. In 2014-15, originally we thought we were going to get 89%, but then at the last part of the year, they cut 2%, so we were prorated at 87%. We anticipate what they're saying now for 15-16 is a 92% proration, and that proration occurs equally over all 22 payments. So we have already started receiving state aid. So as long as that proration stays the same, the number should be fairly accurate to what the state's saying. And this just shows you for the last 3 years, basically what our entitlement should be, so what the calculation should produce in revenue versus what we've received in payment. So in FY16, we're anticipating an entitlement. What we should receive is a little over $2.5 million. What we anticipate receiving is a little over $2.3 million. So it's about a $200,000 difference. Part of the reason too we've seen a decrease in state aid is due to other factors that go into that formula, because even if we were being fully funded, you can tell from FY14 to FY16 it's about a $500,000 decrease. A lot of that is due to a drop in our ADA because they use average daily attendance in this calculation, and they also use local resources. So they basically figure out what you would get in state aid, and then they back off any local resources you have, and the difference is what you're entitled to. So another reason we've seen a difference in our entitlement is because we've had an increase in corporate personal property replacement tax. So when that happens, it's an adverse relationship with what you get in state aid. So between those two things, we've seen a significant drop in our entitlement. ADA, though, was up slightly this year. It went from 1847.58 to 1861.84. So that's good. Hopefully we will start seeing a better trend there. This graph kind of shows what I explained in the beginning with the proration of what state aid used to be. You can see every year it's a downward trend of what we've been receiving. And this is a graph that just shows what the history of our ADA has been. And you can see we had a spike in 12-13, and then we dipped back down at 13-14. Trended up in 14-15, and then 15-16. We're starting to trend upwards, so hopefully that'll continue to be the case. Under other revenue, like I said before, federal revenue and interest income are fairly, those dollars are fairly consistent with previous years. Our mandated categoricals, what we've budgeted for this year, are 4 payments. One for FY 15, so one that we didn't receive last year, and then potentially 3 that we'll receive this year. We're supposed to receive 4 payments a year. So we only received the 3 in 16, so we should get that 1 hopefully this year, and then 3 of the actual FY16 Transportation, again, is going to be prorated, the regular portion of transportation, and that's budgeted around a 70% proration. This pie chart just shows you the categories of our expenditures and how it's broken up on what we have to do for the state, which is the annual financial report. So salaries and benefits obviously makes up the largest portion of our expenditures at 53%. Overall, our total operating expenditures are up about $1.5 million. And like I said, the largest single cost is personnel and benefits. Salaries this year up around $336,000 over prior year. We only had 2 retirements. In the past, we've been able to see some savings in salaries just due to retirements, and we're getting to a point now where there's not quite as many people that are on slated to retire. So we only had 2 retirements, and then we also added 2 positions in English and 1 in social studies this year. We also have another full-time psychologist. We've had that job posted for the last few years, but haven't been able to fill it. So that's another salary expense this year that we didn't have last year. We did have 1 late resignation in the science department, though, and that position was not filled. And we also have not filled a position in JROTC. The other biggest increase that we've seen in salaries and benefits is in insurance. Again, based on the actuarial data we received from United Healthcare, there's an estimation that we will once again have increased insurance claims, and it's about a $385,000 increase over prior year. The purchase services portion of the pie that makes up 17%, that represents like our contract with Aramark, repairs and maintenance that's in the operations and maintenance fund, utilities, the supplies is at 6%, and then equipment is at 15% this year, which is a bigger portion than what we had seen in previous years, but that's to be expected because that represents all the major improvements and projects that we have going on last year and this year. Most notably in the operations and maintenance fund, we have budgeted again to do the other half of the stadium, the waterproofing, and we also have dollars in there for what still needs to be paid out on some projects that were done this year, like the G building roof, and then we also budgeted in there potential expenditure for recropping of fields, which we've talked about in operations and maintenance. We also, in this category, have budgeted for a complete network overhaul that happened this summer. That network was budgeted for close to $160,000. We had hoped, do you want me just to talk about it? Okay. We have had conversations, I think, when we talked about the network, we had conversations about the potential reimbursement under E-rate funding. We still have not gotten that approval letter, so the full amount is budgeted. We do hopefully anticipate getting that funding, and that will all work out. If we do, we're hoping about $123,000 of that total network will be funded with E-rate money. But this time it's not reflected in the budget because we don't have approval yet. And then the other piece of the pie is tuition and other, and that makes up 9%. This was down from previous years. A lot of what's in here is the expenditures that we have for out-of-district special ed students who we have to pay to go to another facility. We had been in 12-13 just over $1 million in expenditures for tuition. This year we're hoping to be around $850,000. And then this is just a chart that shows you the gaps between our revenues and expenditures, and you can see that we've had peaks and valleys throughout the time. There's been years where we've had surpluses, years where we've had expenditures, and luckily we've been able to keep everything balanced and not make any drastic changes, which I think certainly the the board should be proud of themselves for, because I think that's the whole purpose of trying to ride out the storm and continue to do what's best for students, and sometimes have to make tough decisions, but I think we've made good choices along the way that's been given us the ability to be able to keep our programs and keep what we're doing going strong here. So, and then this is just a summary that shows once again the operations budgets that in total where we're looking, in the ed fund, we're looking at a deficit of about $520,000. O&M, $385,000 deficit, a deficit again in transportation of $48,000, and then working cash of surplus of $17,000. So overall, a deficit of $936,000 in our operations fund. So it's not a pretty picture by any means. We're certainly not alone in the scenario. So obviously, we hope. I mean, it's a conservative budget, and we hope that we come in slightly better than this, but. This is what we're looking at for 15-16. And then in non-operating funds, same thing. Like I said earlier, in health, life, safety. Now, we saw the large surplus in 14-15, and now you're going to see it continued deficits as we spend that money down. So that's a $2.8 million deficit in life safety, which makes up the majority of that deficit of $3 million. And once again, O&M, I want to talk about O&M. You also should be able to find in the financial reports that are scanned in on Board Book, you'll see the detail of the budget numbers too in each specific department. So certainly if you have any questions on that, I'd be more than happy to answer those. And then this last page is just a snapshot. It's hard to see up there, but it's just a cash page that I think I typically provide every year that kind of shows you what our estimated fund balances look like at the end of 2016, assuming the budget numbers as presented. The budget will be in our office on file until September 28th. By law, it has to be displayed for 30 days, and then we'll have the public budget hearing at the September 28th board meeting. I would be happy to answer any questions.
I would like just to make a comment. I don't feel as optimistic about that E-rate funding as you hopefully are feeling. And I just want to say that if it doesn't come to fruition, it's not for lack of trying, and it's not due to any fault of anyone in this district. I think it's a difficult subject matter to deal with, and I hope I'm pleasantly surprised, but I'm not holding my breath. Mrs. Schaefer, I think this district is very fortunate to have a person like you on board, because you clearly love numbers. And
some days more than others.
So I'm sure some days more than others. And in the opinion of this board member, I think you're very good at what you do. And we're blessed to have you. Thank you for all the effort you put into this, and even the sleep that you lose at night. Sometimes I know you do.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Schaefer.
It's this time of year she starts to see cross-eyed when you go in there.
Yeah. Pretty soon I'll have reading glasses on. Close. Yeah.
At this point, I would be looking for a motion for board approval to place the tentative 2015-2016 district budget on display for public inspection as presented, with adoption scheduled for the September 2015 regular Board of Education meeting. Mrs. Hoheimer says so move.
Second.
Is that Mr. Reed? Thank you. Motion by Mrs. Hoheimer, second by Mr. Wrigley, for placing the tentative budget on display as required. Before we have a vote, are there any questions or concerns? Mr. White, would you call the roll, please?
Hoheimer.
Aye.
Ridley.
Aye.
Allison Green.
Aye.
Rivera.
Aye.
Bill. Aye. Huey.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye. Motion carries. Tentative budget will be placed on display. Moving on, we have reports. And the first of those, as is usually the case, would be resignations. Mrs. Hoheimer.
Yes, we have 6 resignations to report. Randy Calvert, teacher for the science department. Zach Grice, personal assistant for the special education department. Rachel Haynes, teacher's aide for the special education department. Sarah Rui, job coach for the special education department. Cole Stoner, assistant coach for the boys golf program. And Marshall Tucker, teacher for the driver's education department, head coach for the boys track program, and strength coach. And that's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Moving on, we have Policy Committee, Mr. Wrigley.
Policy Committee did not meet this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wrigley. You deserve a break. How about Operation and Maintenance, Mr. Alessandrini?
We did meet this evening. We had a presentation from representatives from Midwest Engineering that is overseeing the HVAC project for this building that we will be going out for bids later this fall. They updated the timeline and their process in regards to that. We also reviewed the projects that were completed this summer. And then the entire board was invited on a tour of the facilities to witness those projects that were completed.
Thank you, Mr. Alessandrini. You managed to stay very busy on O&M. I think it
The
directly,
policy committee can't meet.
really directly correlates to that life, health, safety they were talking about. Mrs. Shaver was talking about. How about Labor Management Relations Committee? Anything on that? Haven't met, right?
Correct. We'll
Student
meet on
achievement.
September 3rd.
Same with student achievement, right?
Correct. September 17th is when that's
Okay.
slated.
So that moves us down to FOIA request. Dr. Owens?
We did have one FOIA request late last week from IEA. The FOIA request was having to do with non-certified staff. It was a large FOIA request, but then it was followed by an email that said, except if you have this, which we did, so I got to respond immediately that all of our non-certified staff are covered by our IEA, and so we were then exempt from that FOIA request, which was music to all of our ears.
So you got lucky, right?
I did, for the first one I got lucky. Yeah, beginner's luck.
Calendar.
Yeah.
And then moving on, you have opening of school and institute days.
We had a wonderful opening to school. Obviously, it was marked, we didn't know what that was going to look like when we had a water main break, but Court Street opened just in time, at least 2 lanes open, just in time for school to start. We had a first day institute day for staff. Building level did a wonderful job. We had ed camps, which has been a tradition now for about 3 years, where staff are the experts on different subjects and get to visit each other in terms of some professional development. We had a wonderful Dragon Day, which is always headed up by Lisa Stoles and a committee of students, and so that went off without a hitch. And thanks again to Student Council that we had a wonderful lunch the first day, and a lunch that you alluded to the second day, so we had a great opening to school. It's always filled with lots of things, and by the end of the week, even though it's a 3-day week for students, I think everybody goes home on Friday fairly exhausted. So we did have the red-white game on Friday, and we did have a staff event on Saturday for families. They could bring their families to a movie that we had outside. We showed Despicable Me 2, so that was a nice family event for those who chose to participate. So we are officially off and running.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. Next item would be future agenda items. If there's something a board member would like to see on the future agenda, now's the time to raise the issue. Hearing none, we'll move on to announcements by the president. With calendar in hand, I would like all of you to be looking ahead. The ISD Central Illinois Valley Fall Dinner Meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 7th at Tremont High School. Each of you have has a flyer in front of you, and if you think you might be able to go, be thinking along those lines. Also, I want to point out to you that Mr. White has available tonight 2015 PCHS football season tickets, adult and/or student, as well as parking lot passes. If you have an interest in those items, please see Mr. White. The next regular meeting of the Board of Education is scheduled for Monday, September 28th, 2015 in this boardroom. Seeing no further agenda items to be discussed, I declare this meeting adjourned until the next regularly scheduled meeting, and I thank all of you for your participation.